America didn't conquer Europe after World War II. It bought it. Not with tanks, with wheat, dollars, loans, and one very quiet promise: align with us and you get to survive. This is the story of how the most generous rescue in modern history was also one of the smartest power grabs ever executed. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the bill for that bargain is finally coming due, 80 years later, in the middle of an American election cycle. Here's the version of this story most people know. Europe was destroyed. America stepped in with the Marshall Plan out of pure generosity. Everyone was saved. Roll credits. That version isn't false, it's just incomplete. And incomplete history is how you get fooled twice. Because the real question was never whether America helped Europe. It did. The real question is what America got back. And the answer is almost everything that matters in the modern world. Loyal allies, captive markets, military bases, a dollar sitting at the center of the planet's financial system, and a continent that would check with Washington before it made a serious move for the next 70 years. That's not charity. That's architecture. And it started before a single dollar of aid was ever sent. Picture Europe in 1945. Not liberated and celebrating Europe. Actually standing in the rubble Europe. Berlin is a moonscape. French factories are shells. British coffers are empty despite winning the war. Then the winter of 1946 hits, and it's brutal. Coal runs out, trains stop, crops fail. People who survived years of bombing are now freezing and hungry in the middle of what's supposed to be peace. And here's the part that should scare you if you're sitting in Washington in 1945. Hungry people don't stay moderate. When bread gets expensive enough, the guy promising to burn the system down starts sounding pretty reasonable. Communist parties in France and Italy weren't fringe groups. They were massive, organized, and popular. If capitalism had a marketing department in 1945, the first memo would have said, "We have a serious image problem." So America had a choice to make. And it wasn't really a choice about kindness. It was a choice about containment. Here's what almost nobody remembers, though. The real move didn't happen with the Marshall Plan. It happened a year before the war even ended, in a hotel in New Hampshire. 44 countries showed up to design the entire post-war financial system before the fighting was even over. Out of that meeting came the IMF, the World Bank, and one detail that mattered more than all of it combined. Every currency on Earth would now be pegged directly or indirectly to the US dollar. Read that again. Before America rebuilt a single European factory, it had already installed itself as the operating system those factories would run on. That's not aid. That's infrastructure. And once you're the infrastructure, you don't need to conquer anyone. Everyone just has to keep using you. Then came the part everyone actually remembers. June 1947, a speech at Harvard. $13 billion, over $100 billion today, flowing into Western Europe as food, fuel, machinery, and cash. And to be fair to the official story, this part really was generous. Most of it was grants, not loans. Nobody's still quietly paying off the Marshall Plan like a 1948 credit card bill. But here's the twist most people miss. The money wasn't just meant to rebuild Europe. It was meant to rebuild Europe in a shape America could live with. Countries receiving aid had to cooperate with each other, cut trade barriers, modernize their industries, and resist the pull toward communism. And a huge chunk of that aid money did something almost poetic. It flowed straight back into the American economy because the wheat, the machines, the oil, and the ships that Europe desperately needed all happened to be sitting in American ports. So follow the loop. American taxpayers fund the aid, European governments get relief, American companies get the orders. Everybody wins. Everybody's also now locked into the same system. You want proof this was strategy dressed as charity, not just charity? Look at Italy in 1948. Washington was terrified the Italian election would tip the country into the Soviet camp. So money, propaganda, and political pressure flowed in to make sure it didn't. Feeding people and fighting communism weren't two separate stories. They were the same operation wearing two different outfits. And nowhere does this flip get more dramatic than Germany. Right after the war, the plan was simple. Keep Germany weak forever so it can never threaten anyone again. But that plan lasted about 3 years, because someone in Washington did the math and realized a broken Germany just meant a broken, communist-friendly Europe. so the punishment plan got quietly shredded. In 1948, a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, hit the streets of West Germany. That same year, the Soviets blockaded Berlin, trying to strangle the city into surrender. America and Britain answered by supplying an entire city from the sky for nearly a year. Just like that, the country that started the war became the frontline soldier in the next one. Germany went from existential threat to economic engine in 3 years flat. Not because anyone forgot what happened, but because the next war had already started, and this one was fought with currencies and factories instead of tanks. Money alone doesn't hold an empire together, though. You need muscle behind it. So in 1949, NATO shows up. On paper, it's mutual defense. In reality, it puts American military power at the center of every European security decision from that point forward. Think of it like this. The Marshall Plan built the house. NATO installed the locks, and America kept a copy of every key. That deal looked incredible for decades. Europe got to rebuild without carrying the full cost of its own defense. It poured that saved money into hospitals, pensions, highways, and schools. America got something arguably more valuable: a permanently loyal customer with a gun pointed at its enemy for it. But here's the thing about someone else holding your umbrella. Eventually, you start checking the weather with them before you make any decision at all. And that dependency is exactly the bill coming due right now in real time in American politics. For decades, nobody questioned this arrangement because it felt fair. American power abroad and American prosperity at home moved together. Strong wages, strong unions, a booming middle class. Global leadership felt like it was paying for itself. That connection has snapped. Decades of factories closing, wages stalling, housing becoming unaffordable, and medical bills bankrupting families have left a lot of Americans looking at NATO and asking a much angrier question: why are we still rebuilding everyone else when nobody rebuilt us? That question is exactly why Donald Trump could turn a 70-year-old alliance into a punchline about unpaid bills. He didn't invent the resentment, he just gave it a price tag. NATO isn't a subscription service, and European governments don't send Washington a monthly invoice for protection. But the message lands anyway, because it turns something complicated into something anyone can understand. Who pays, who benefits, and who's getting played. And there's a version of that story that feels true even where it's not fully fair. America builds aircraft carriers, Europe builds hospitals, America bleeds money, Europe calls it civilization. It's oversimplified, but it touches something real. Because European welfare states didn't hollow out American factories. American elites did that at home with American policy. Blaming Brussels is just easier than looking in the mirror, which brings us to the real crack in the whole system. The story America was selling stops working the moment the audience stops believing it. The Marshall Plan wasn't only a check, it was one of the most effective advertising campaigns in history. It sold the world an idea. American leadership means stocked shelves, stable currencies, and a future worth showing up for. That pitch only works if the country selling it looks like it's actually winning. It's very hard to sell that dream abroad when a huge share of the people living inside it no longer feel like they're winning at home. So back to the question we opened with. Did America buy Europe? Not with a suitcase of cash slid across a table. It bought something bigger. It bought the future Europe would have to operate inside. It wrote the financial rules, supplied the security, opened the markets, and made itself impossible to remove from the equation. For most of a century, that was the entire genius of the plan. Europe got to recover, America got to dominate, nobody had to call it what it was. But every empire built on being needed runs into the same wall eventually. The moment its own people stop feeling like they're getting paid for holding it up. Crisis creates need. Need creates dependence. Dependence creates leverage. Leverage becomes power. And when the rewards of that power get hoarded at the top while the public gets handed the bill, power stops looking like strength and starts looking like a scam. So here's the real question worth sitting with, and it's not about 1947 anymore. It's about right now. What happens when the country holding the umbrella decides it's done paying for everyone else's weather? If this changed how you see the last 80 years, subscribe to Wealth Code because we're just getting started.